The space station, Concordia, floated in the darkness between stars, a neutral meeting ground where desperate diplomacy would decide humanity's fate. Ambassador Kethvar stepped through the airlock, his tall figure moving with the perfect grace of the hegemony. His pale blue skin seemed to glow under the station's lights, and his large black eyes showed no emotion as he scanned the human welcoming committee. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at the front of the group, her hands clasped behind her back to hide their shaking. She had studied alien psychology for 15 years, but nothing could have prepared her for this moment. Earth had 1 week before the hegemony fleet would begin orbital bombardment. This meeting was humanity's last chance. "Ambassador Kethvar," Sarah said, stepping forward with a slight bow. "Welcome to Concordia. I am Dr. Chen, your assigned liaison during these proceedings." Kethvar's translator device hummed softly at his throat before speaking in perfect English. "Dr. Chen, I have reviewed your credentials. Your expertise in xenopsychology is adequate for our purposes." Sarah noticed something strange. When Kethvar spoke the word adequate, his translator seemed to pause for just a moment longer than usual. She filed this observation away in her mind. The hegemony had made their position clear through weeks of transmissions. Humanity was infected with what they called emotional contagion, the dangerous tendency to sacrifice oneself for others. This behavior, they claimed, was spreading to other species who came into contact with humans. The galaxy's order depended on rational self-interest. Humanity's willingness to die for strangers threatened everything the hegemony had built. "If I may ask," Sarah said as they walked through the station's corridors, "have you ever experienced direct contact with humans before?" "No," Kethvar replied. "Hegemony protocol requires minimal exposure to infected species. You are the first humans I have encountered in person." Sarah studied his face as they walked. The hegemony bred their citizens for perfection, tall, graceful, with features that seemed carved from marble. But there was something in Kethvar's expression that didn't match the cold efficiency she expected. When he thought she wasn't looking, his eyes seemed to linger on small details. A human child's drawing taped to a wall, 2 maintenance workers helping each other repair a panel. "Tell me about your family structure," Kethvar said suddenly. The question caught Sarah off guard. "Our family structure? That's not typically part of diplomatic protocols." "Indulge my curiosity." Sarah thought carefully about her answer. Human families are built on emotional bonds. Parents sacrifice for their children, siblings protect each other, and partners support one another through difficulties. We choose to put others' needs before our own because we love them. Kethvar stopped walking. His translator was silent for almost 10 seconds, an eternity in diplomatic conversation. When it finally spoke, his voice seemed different somehow. "Love. Your translation systems struggle with this concept. Our language has no equivalent term. What do you call the bonds between hegemony citizens? Efficiency partnerships. Genetic optimization protocols. Resource allocation agreements." Kethvar resumed walking, but his pace was slower now. "We eliminated emotional bonds 3,000 years ago. They led to irrational decisions that weakened our society." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's temperature. "You eliminated love. We eliminated weakness." They reached the main conference room where Earth's delegation waited. Sarah had been working for 72 hours straight, preparing humanity's defense against charges of galactic contamination. Her vision blurred slightly as exhaustion hit her like a wave. The room tilted. Sarah's knees buckled as consciousness started to slip away. She expected to hit the cold metal floor, but instead felt strong hands catch her arms. Warm fingers steadied her, holding her upright until her vision cleared. She looked up to find Kethvar supporting her weight, his face closer to hers than any hegemony citizen had ever been to a human. For just a moment, she saw something impossible in his black eyes. Concern. "Dr. Chen," he said quietly, "you require rest." "I'm fine," Sarah managed, though they both knew she wasn't. Kethvar helped her to a chair, his touch gentle and careful. Only when she was safely seated did he step back, and Sarah saw him glance quickly at the security cameras positioned around the room. His face had returned to its neutral diplomatic mask, but she had seen what lay beneath it. "The Hegemony Council observes all interactions," he said, as if answering her unspoken question. This contact was necessary to prevent injury. But Sarah knew better. She had studied alien body language long enough to recognize when someone was lying. Kethvar hadn't caught her out of protocol necessity. He had acted on instinct, the same instinct that made humans reach out to help strangers. The rest of the human delegation entered the room, chatting quietly among themselves. Sarah watched as Kethvar observed them, his head tilting slightly when Admiral Harrison asked about Dr. Kim's daughter's recovery from surgery. The translator hummed again when someone mentioned visiting their grandmother over the holidays. "These conversations serve no practical purpose," Kethvar said to Sarah, "yet your people engage in them regularly." "We call it caring about each other," Sarah replied. "It's what makes us human." Kethvar was quiet for a long moment. "The hegemony believes this behavior is a mental illness, that rational beings would never risk themselves for others." "What do you believe, Ambassador?" Instead of answering, Kethvar took his place at the conference table. But Sarah noticed that he chose the seat closest to her, positioning himself between her and the door. It was a protective stance, she realized, something he might not even be aware he was doing. As the formal proceedings began, Sarah felt the first glimmer of hope she'd had in weeks. The hegemony might have sent Kethvar to condemn humanity, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had sent someone capable of understanding exactly what they were trying to destroy. The diplomatic sessions stretched into their third day. Sarah stood before a massive holographic display, presenting humanity's case to the Hegemony Council through Kethvar's neural link. Images of human history filled the air, soldiers throwing themselves on grenades to save their comrades, doctors working through plagues to heal the sick, parents diving into burning buildings to rescue their children. "These examples demonstrate the pattern we have identified," Sarah explained, her voice steady, despite knowing that billions of lives hung on her words. "Humans consistently choose the welfare of others over their own survival. This behavior appears in every culture, every time period, every social structure we have developed." The Hegemony Council's response came through Kethvar's translator, though Sarah noticed he seemed to pause before speaking their words. "These cases support our diagnosis of widespread mental instability. No rational species would develop such self-destructive tendencies." Sarah switched to a new display showing human achievements. "This same tendency has driven our greatest accomplishments. We explore dangerous frontiers to expand knowledge for future generations. We create art and literature that will outlive us. We build societies designed to benefit people we will never meet." "Inefficient resource allocation," came the Council's reply through Kethvar. But again, that slight pause before the translation. Admiral Harrison leaned forward from his seat at the delegation table. "Ambassador Kethvar, may I ask about your own people's achievements? What drives hegemony innovation?" This time the pause was longer. Kethvar's black eyes seemed to focus inward, as if accessing memories through his neural implant. "Hegemony citizens contribute to society to maximize their personal resource allocation and social standing. Innovation occurs when individuals calculate that creative solutions will benefit their own position." "Nothing else?" Dr. Kim asked quietly. No curiosity? No desire to leave something behind for others? Kethvar was silent for almost a minute. When he finally spoke, Sarah wasn't sure if the words came from him or from the council through him. Curiosity and legacy building were eliminated as inefficient emotional responses. During the lunch break, Sarah found herself walking with Kethvar through the station's observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the transparent aluminum windows, and Earth was visible as a tiny blue dot in the distance. "Dr. Chen," Kethvar said, his voice different when they were alone. The formal diplomatic tone was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost hesitant. "May I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Yesterday you collapsed from exhaustion. Our medical scans indicate you had not rested properly in over 70 hours. You risked your health, your effectiveness in these negotiations, potentially your life. For what purpose?" Sarah looked out at the stars, thinking about how to explain. "Those people in the conference room aren't just my colleagues. They're my friends. Admiral Harrison taught my daughter to sail. Dr. Kim helped my mother through cancer treatments. And beyond them," she gestured toward Earth, "there are 8 billion people I've never met who are counting on us to find a solution. You would die for strangers? If it meant they could live?" "Yes." Kethvar turned to face her fully. "I do not understand this logic. If you die, you cannot help anyone. If you preserve yourself, you remain able to contribute to society. But what kind of society would it be if nobody was willing to sacrifice for others? Who would take care of children? Who would help the elderly? Who would risk their lives to save someone from a fire or a flood?" Sarah met his gaze. "A society where everyone only cares about themselves isn't a society at all. It's just a collection of individuals using each other. The hegemony has functioned successfully for 3 millennia under such principles. Has it? Or has it just existed?" Something flickered across Kethvar's features, too quick for Sarah to identify, but definitely there. "What do you mean? When did your people last create something beautiful just because it was beautiful? When did someone last help a stranger with no expectation of reward? When did anyone last laugh until they cried? Or cry because something was so magnificent it hurt to look at?" Kethvar was very still. Those responses serve no practical function. Maybe that's exactly why they matter. Sarah moved closer to the window, pressing her palm against the cool surface. "Ambassador, can I tell you something? I'm terrified. Not just of dying, but of failing everyone who's counting on me. But I'm also grateful. Grateful that I get to be here. That I get to try to save them, even if I fail. That I get to care about something bigger than myself, even if it hurts, even if it's scary. I wouldn't trade these feelings for all the efficiency in the galaxy." Kethvar moved to stand beside her at the window. For a long moment, they looked out at the stars in silence. Then he spoke, so quietly she almost missed it. "I dream sometimes." Sarah's heart skipped. The hegemony didn't dream. They had eliminated the brain functions that created dreams along with emotional responses. "What do you dream about?" "Colors that have no names. Music that follows no mathematical principles. And—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "Faces. People I have never met, but who seem familiar. They reach out to me and I want to reach back, but I cannot move." "That doesn't sound like a malfunction," Sarah said gently. "That sounds like imagination. Like longing. The Council believes it is evidence of contamination from contact with your species." Sarah felt a chill of fear. "What happens to contaminated hegemony citizens?" Kethvar didn't answer directly. "The neural implants monitor all thoughts and responses. Deviation from acceptable parameters triggers automatic correction protocols. And if correction fails, then the deviation is eliminated." They stood in silence as the implications sank in. Sarah realized that by simply talking to her, by asking questions, by showing curiosity about human behavior, HFY was risking his life. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. HFY turned from the window to face her. "Because yesterday, when you collapsed, I felt something I had never experienced before. When I saw you falling, my first thought was not of protocol or efficiency. It was—" He struggled with the word. "Fear. Fear that you would be hurt. And when I caught you, when I saw that you were safe, I felt relief." "Those are perfectly normal responses," Sarah said. "Not for me, not for my people." HFY's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Dr. Chen, I think I am beginning to understand what you call caring, and I think the Council is right to be afraid of it." A soft chime indicated that the afternoon session would begin soon. As they walked back toward the conference room, Sarah found herself wondering if humanity's greatest advocate in these negotiations might be the very person sent to condemn them. But she also wondered how long HFY could hide his growing emotions from his own people, and what would happen when they discovered that their perfect ambassador was becoming dangerously human. The alarm began as a low hum that quickly rose to a deafening wail. Emergency lights bathed the conference room in red as the station's computer announced in calm, measured tones, "Security breach in sectors 7 through 12. All personnel proceed to designated safe zones." Sarah was on her feet instantly, her diplomatic training taking over. "Ambassador, we need to move to the secure areas immediately." But HFY was standing perfectly still, his black eyes unfocused as information flowed through his neural implant. "Negative, Dr. Chen. This is not a random security incident. The Kethnari Liberation Front has taken control of the eastern sections of the station." Admiral Harrison cursed under his breath. The Kethnari were extremists from the Outer Rim who believed the galaxy should be purged of all inferior species. They had been responsible for dozens of terrorist attacks over the past decade. "How many hostiles?" Harrison asked. 17 armed militants, HFY replied, still connected to the station's security network through his implant. "They have taken 43 hostages in the civilian quarters, including—" His voice stopped abruptly. "Including what?" Sarah demanded. HFY's eyes focused on her with an intensity that made her step back. "Including the families of your delegation, spouses, children." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Dr. Kim's 8-year-old daughter was supposed to be in the family quarters with her mother. Admiral Harrison's husband had arrived just yesterday for a brief visit. "The Kethnari have issued demands," HFY continued. "They want all human representatives surrendered to them within 1 hour, or they will begin executing hostages. They intend to broadcast the executions across the galaxy as proof of human weakness." Harrison was already moving toward the door. "We have to get to them." "Admiral, stop!" HFY's voice carried an authority that made everyone freeze. "The Kethnari have positioned explosives throughout the eastern sections. Any attempt at rescue will result in massive structural damage to the station." "Then what do you suggest?" Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. HFY's expression became perfectly neutral, the diplomatic mask sliding back into place. "Hegemony protocol is clear in these situations. Ambassador personnel must be evacuated to safety immediately. The fate of other species is not our concern." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "You're going to leave them to die?" "I'm going to follow orders." But even as he said the words, Sarah could see something struggling behind his eyes. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of evacuation procedures. Hegemony security forces escorted HFY toward the emergency escape pods, while Sarah and her team were taken to a reinforced safe room. Through the security monitors, they could see the terrorists moving through the civilian quarters, weapons trained on terrified families. Sarah watched the screens and felt something breaking inside her chest. On monitor 7, she could see Dr. Kim's daughter huddled against her mother, both of them crying silently. On monitor 12, Admiral Harrison's husband was trying to calm an elderly human couple who looked confused and frightened. "The hegemony fleet is maintaining safe distance," reported Lieutenant Torres from the communication station. "They're not intervening." "Of course they're not," Harrison said bitterly. "Why risk their precious ambassador for a bunch of humans?" But Sarah was staring at monitor 3, which showed the corridor outside the escape pod bay. Kethvar stood there alone, his tall figure motionless beside the open hatch that would carry him to safety. His head was tilted upward, as if he was listening to something. Probably council orders through his neural implant. Then he did something that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Kethvar reached up and touched the implant at the base of his skull. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the device's soft blue glow went dark. "Oh no," Sarah whispered. "What is he doing?" Kethvar had just cut himself off from the hegemony collective consciousness. For the first time in his life, he was completely alone in his own mind. Sarah could only imagine how terrifying that must be for someone who had never experienced true solitude. Instead of boarding the escape pod, Kethvar turned and walked back into the station. "Where is he going?" Dr. Kim asked. Sarah was already moving toward the door of the safe room. "He's going to help them." "That's impossible," Harrison said. "The hegemony doesn't risk their own people for others. It's against everything they believe." But Sarah knew better. She had spent days watching Kethvar struggle with concepts his people had tried to eliminate from their society. She had seen him catch her when she fell, had heard him ask about human families and emotions. The contamination the hegemony feared was already spreading through their perfect ambassador. On the monitors, they could see Kethvar moving through the station's service corridors with the fluid grace of a trained operative. Sarah realized that everything about his diplomatic persona had been carefully constructed. Beneath the polite, curious ambassador was something much more dangerous. When the first Kethnari patrol found him, Kethvar allowed them to capture him without resistance. They dragged him into the hostage area, adding him to their collection of prisoners. But Sarah noticed that he positioned himself between the terrorists and a group of human children. "He's going to get himself killed," Harrison said quietly. Sarah shook her head, watching as Kethvar pretended to cower while actually studying the terrorists' positions and equipment. "No, he's going to save them." 2 hours passed. The terrorists grew more agitated as their deadline approached, and no human delegation appeared to surrender. Their leader, a scarred Kethnari with cybernetic implants covering half his face, decided to make an example. "You," he said, pointing at Sarah's image on a security monitor they had broadcasting from the civilian quarters. "The human female with the scientific designation. We know you can hear us. You have 30 minutes to surrender yourself, or we begin with the smallest ones." On monitor 7, Dr. Kim's daughter pressed closer to her mother, tears streaming down her young face. Sarah was already reaching for her communication device when Kethvar made his move. The hegemony ambassador had been slowly working at the restraints binding his wrists for the past hour. When he finally broke free, it happened so fast that even the security cameras could barely track his movements. 3 terrorists were unconscious before the others realized what was happening. But instead of the efficient, emotionless violence Sarah expected from a hegemony operative, Kethvar fought with something else driving him. When one terrorist aimed a weapon at a human child, Kethvar threw himself directly into the line of fire, taking a plasma bolt to his shoulder that would have killed the little girl. As blue blood flowed down his arm, Kethvar looked directly at the security camera. For just a moment, Sarah saw him mouth 2 words, "For you." Then he collapsed to his knees, wounded but alive, while the remaining terrorists scrambled to regain control of the situation they had never expected to face. an ambassador of the mighty hegemony, bleeding to protect strangers from a species his people considered diseased. In the safe room, Sarah pressed her hand against the monitor screen and realized that everything had changed. HFY hadn't just crossed a boundary by helping them, he had shattered it completely, proving that the emotional contagion the hegemony feared was more powerful than they had ever imagined. The question now was whether either of them would live long enough to see what came next. HFY pressed his uninjured hand against the plasma burn on his shoulder, blue blood seeping between his fingers. The terrorist leader stood over him, weapon aimed at his head, screaming threats and demands. But HFY's attention was focused on the small human girl cowering behind her mother just 3 meters away. "You made a mistake, hegemony scum!" the scarred Kethnari snarled. "Your people don't sacrifice themselves for others. This proves you're as infected as the humans." HFY looked up at his captor with eyes that no longer held any diplomatic pretense. Perhaps infection is simply another word for awakening. In the safe room, Sarah watched the monitors with growing dread. HFY was outnumbered 14-1 now, wounded, and the terrorists were becoming increasingly unstable. Through the security feeds, she could see him methodically studying their positions. But she also saw the way he kept himself between the weapons and the hostages, even when it put him in greater danger. "He's not fighting like a hegemony operative," Admiral Harrison observed. "They're trained for maximum efficiency with minimal concern for collateral damage. But he's protecting the civilians first." Dr. Kim clutched her husband's arm as they watched their daughter on the screen. "Why is he doing this? He barely knows us." Sarah knew the answer, though she wasn't sure she could explain it. "Because he's learning what it means to care." On the monitor, the terrorist leader was growing impatient. "Enough games. We'll make an example of the human scientist instead." He gestured toward Dr. Kim's wife and daughter. "Bring them forward. Let the galaxy see what happens to species that spread their emotional poison." That was when HFY stopped pretending to be helpless. The transformation was terrifying in its completeness. One moment, he was a wounded diplomat slumped against the wall. The next, he was something else entirely. A weapon with purpose beyond mere survival. His movements were liquid precision as he rolled away from his guard, his hand finding the plasma cutter that had fallen during the earlier struggle. But unlike the cold efficiency Sarah expected from hegemony training, HFY's actions were guided by something more. Every strike, every movement was calculated not just to neutralize threats, but to shield the innocents around him. When forced to choose between a clean takedown and the safety of nearby hostages, he chose the more difficult path that kept them safe. The terrorist leader managed to get off one shot before HFY reached him. The plasma bolt caught the ambassador in the ribs, spinning him around. But even as he fell, HFY's momentum carried him forward, and his own weapon found its mark. 14 terrorists became 10, then 6, then 3, then none. But each victory cost HFY more blood, more strength. By the time the last hostile fell, he was barely standing, multiple wounds painting his pale blue skin with darker stains. Dr. Kim's daughter was the first to approach him. The 8-year-old girl looked up at the towering alien who had saved her life and very carefully took his uninjured hand. "Thank you," she said simply. HFY stared down at her small fingers wrapped around his. And something broke open in his expression. "You are safe," he managed. "That is what matters." Through the security feeds, Sarah watched as the other hostages gathered around their wounded savior. Admiral Harrison's husband was tearing strips from his shirt to bandage the worst wounds, while Dr. Kim's wife tried to assess the damage with her limited medical knowledge. "We need to get him to the medical bay," Harrison's husband said. "No." HFY's voice was weak but firm. "The Council, they know. They have been watching through the security systems. When I reactivate my neural implant, they will see everything." Sarah's blood went cold. Don't turn it back on. But Kethvar was already reaching for the device at the base of his skull. I must. The hostages need evacuation, and only I can authorize hegemony medical assistance for our wounded. They'll kill you for what you've done, Sarah said through the communication system. Kethvar looked directly at the camera, and for a moment it felt like he was looking straight at her. Some things are worth dying for, Dr. Chen. You taught me that. The neural implant's blue glow returned, and immediately Kethvar's expression changed. Sarah could see the moment when the Hegemony Council's thoughts flooded back into his mind, when they witnessed through his memories everything he had done in the past 3 hours. The reaction was swift and merciless. Through the station's communication system, a new voice spoke, cold and mechanical, the collective will of the Hegemony Council. Ambassador Kethvar, you are in violation of fundamental hegemony protocols. You have prioritized alien life over your own welfare, engaged in emotional decision-making, and demonstrated complete contamination with human behavioral patterns. You are hereby stripped of rank and marked for immediate execution. The words echoed through the station like a death sentence. On the monitors, Sarah watched as Kethvar's shoulders sagged, not from his wounds, but from the weight of what he had lost. His entire identity, his connection to his people, his place in the universe, all sacrificed for a group of strangers he had chosen to call worth saving. Hegemony Fleet Command, this is Dreadnought Absolute Zero, came another transmission. We are moving to retrieve our compromised operative and execute sanitation protocols. Through the observation deck windows, Sarah could see the massive Hegemony warship approaching the station. Its weapons were powering up, not just to execute Kethvar, but potentially to destroy the entire station to prevent the infection from spreading further. In the civilian quarters, Kethvar struggled to his feet as automated systems announced the arrival of Hegemony security forces. Dr. Kim's daughter still held his hand, looking up at him with the trust that only children could show. "Are the bad men coming back?" she asked. Kethvar knelt down carefully, bringing himself to her eye level despite the pain it caused. "Different bad men are coming, but you will be safe. I promise." "What about you?" For a moment, Kethvar's diplomatic composure cracked completely, and Sarah saw the person he had become beneath the perfect hegemony exterior. "I will be exactly where I choose to be." The docking clamps engaged with a metallic clang that resonated through the station's hull. Hegemony security forces were boarding, and they were coming for their contaminated ambassador. In the safe room, Sarah was already moving toward the door. "I have to do something." "Sarah, no." Harrison caught her arm. "There's nothing you can do. This is Hegemony internal affairs." Sarah pulled free from his grip. "Nothing I can do? Admiral, that man just saved 43 lives because we taught him what it means to care about others. If we abandon him now, we prove that the Council was right about us all along." She activated the station-wide communication system, her voice carrying to every corner of Concordia, every ship in the surrounding space. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen, speaking for the human delegation. Ambassador Kethvar, if you can hear this, you are not alone. And what you've done here today, what you've chosen to become, that's not contamination, that's evolution." Through the monitors, she saw Kethvar look up at the speaker with something that might have been hope. But the Hegemony security teams were already in the corridors, weapons ready, moving with mechanical precision toward the man who had dared to love at the cost of everything he had ever known. The execution chamber materialized around Kethvar in seconds, a containment field of pure energy that would disintegrate him at the molecular level. He stood in its center, blue blood still seeping from his wounds, while Hegemony security forces took positions around the civilian quarters. "Final protocols initiated," announced Captain Zethmore, the Hegemony security commander. "Contaminated operative will be cleansed in 30 seconds. All witnesses will be processed for potential infection. But something unexpected happened. Lieutenant Vexara, a young hegemony officer who had been watching the rescue through the security feeds, stepped forward. "Captain, I request permission to speak." Zethmore turned toward her with mechanical precision. "State your concern, Lieutenant." The contaminated operative? He calculated a solution that preserved 43 lives while neutralizing 17 hostile targets. His efficiency rating exceeded standard parameters by 37%. A murmur went through the hegemony ranks, confusion where there should have been certainty. "Efficiency is irrelevant when contaminated with emotional decision-making," Zethmore replied, but there was a slight hesitation in his voice. "Captain," another voice spoke up, Ensign Dracath, barely past his first century. "If emotional decision-making produces superior tactical results, should we not study it rather than eliminate it?" Sarah watched through the monitors as something impossible began to happen. The hegemony forces, those perfect soldiers of order and logic, were questioning their orders. The infection was spreading in real time, transmitted not through some biological agent, but through the simple act of witnessing someone choose love over survival. "Silence," Zethmore commanded. "You are all exhibiting signs of contamination. Report for immediate neural reconditioning after execution is complete." In the energy containment field, Kethvar raised his head. Blood loss had weakened him, but his voice carried clearly across the station's communication system. "Captain Zethmore, I invoke the right of final statement as granted to all condemned hegemony citizens. You are no longer a hegemony citizen. Then I invoke it as the last gift of the species you are about to make extinct," Kethvar said quietly. "Because if you kill me for caring, you kill the best part of what we could become." Sarah held her breath. The right of final statement was an ancient hegemony law that allowed condemned criminals to broadcast their last words across their people's collective network. It had not been used in over 2,000 years. Zethmore clearly wanted to refuse, but law was law in hegemony society. "You have 60 seconds. Kethvar closed his eyes and accessed his neural implant one final time, but instead of recording a simple message, he opened his complete memory files. Every moment of his time with the humans, every question he had asked, every emotion he had felt. "My name is Kethvar, former ambassador of the hegemony," his voice carried across subspace to every hegemony ship in the sector. "For the past week, I have been studying the species we came to condemn. I was sent to catalog their mental illness, to confirm our decision to eliminate their emotional contagion from the galaxy." On the monitors, Sarah could see the human hostages gathering around the energy field, Dr. Kim's daughter pressing her small hands against the containment barrier. "Instead, I discovered that we are the ones who are sick," Kethvar continued. "We call their willingness to sacrifice for others a weakness, but I have seen its strength. Dr. Sarah Chen worked herself to collapse trying to save 8 billion strangers. Admiral Harrison wept when he learned his husband was in danger. A small human child thanked me for saving her life, even as I stood bleeding from wounds received protecting her. Through the neural network, thousands of hegemony citizens across the fleet experienced Kethvar's memories directly. They felt his confusion when Sarah explained love, his wonder at human laughter, his terror when he first disconnected from the collective, and his final, complete understanding when Dr. Kim's daughter took his hand. "We have achieved perfect order," Kethvar said, his voice growing stronger despite his failing body. "But what is order without joy? What is efficiency without purpose? What is survival without something worth living for?" Captain Zethmore was backing away from his control console, his face showing the first expression many had ever seen on a hegemony officer: doubt. "We bred out our ability to love because we thought it made us weak," Kethvar's final words echoed through space. "But strength. True strength is choosing to love anyway, even when it hurts, even when it costs everything, even when you know you might lose what you're trying to protect. The neural broadcast reached deeper into the hegemony fleet. On ship after ship, officers who had never questioned orders found themselves experiencing something they had no words for. Some called it contamination. Others began to recognize it as awakening. "Execution in 10 seconds, Zethmore announced, but his hand hesitated over the controls. "Captain, wait." Lieutenant Vexara stepped forward again. "If we execute him, we prove his point. We prove that we're so afraid of feeling anything that we'll kill our own people to maintain our numbness." He violated every protocol. "To save lives," Ensign Drath interrupted. "To protect the innocent. Are those not worthy goals?" Around the execution chamber, more voices joined in. Young officers who had never seen combat, veterans who had followed orders for centuries, even some senior commanders found themselves questioning the fundamental assumptions of their society. Sarah activated the communication system again. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen. The man you're about to execute saved 43 people today. He bled to protect children he had never met. He chose to care when his entire civilization told him caring was wrong." Her voice broke slightly. "If you kill him, you're not eliminating contamination. You're destroying the best part of yourselves." On the Hegemony flagship, Fleet Admiral Corvex listened to the chaos erupting across his ships. Officers were refusing orders. Security teams were laying down weapons. The infection was spreading faster than any biological contagion ever could. "All ships, withdraw to minimum safe distance," he commanded. "We need time to analyze this situation." In the execution chamber, Kethvar collapsed to his knees as blood loss finally overwhelmed him. The energy field flickered and died as Captain Zethmore's hand moved away from the controls. Sarah was running through the corridors before anyone could stop her. She reached the civilian quarters just as the Hegemony security forces were backing away from their own containment systems, confused and questioning everything they had been taught. She dropped to her knees beside Kethvar, pressing her hands against his wounds to slow the bleeding. His black eyes opened and focused on her face. Did we succeed?" he whispered. Sarah looked around at the Hegemony officers who were now helping tend to the human hostages they had come to eliminate. At Lieutenant Vexara, who was awkwardly but gently bandaging an elderly human man's arm. At Captain Zethmore, who stood frozen in the middle of his own moral revolution. "Yes," she told him. "You crossed the boundary, Kethvar, and you brought others with you." Through the observation windows, they could see the Hegemony fleet dispersing. Some ships were jumping to hyperspace, carrying word of this impossible day back to the core worlds. Others remained, requesting permission to learn more about this emotional contagion that had transformed one of their own. Kethvar smiled, the first completely genuine expression Sarah had ever seen from him. "Then it was worth everything." As medical teams from both species worked to save the wounded ambassador's life, Sarah realized that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. Not through war or conquest, but through one person's choice to love strangers enough to die for them. The boundary that no one had ever dared to cross wasn't between species or empires. It was between existing and truly living, and once crossed, there was no going back. In the months that followed, the Hegemony would fracture and rebuild itself. Some would cling to the old ways, but others would embrace what Kethvar had shown them. The infection would spread, not as a disease, but as a cure for the loneliness that perfect order had created. And at the center of it all would be the memory of an ambassador who chose to bleed for strangers, proving that love wasn't humanity's weakness to be feared, but the universe's strength to be shared.